Hello my friends, do you know that the Baltics are building a wall? That's right, finally Estonia will be defended from all those pesky Mexicans. Of course I'm joking. Baltics are building a wall not against Mexicans, but instead against the Russian army. It is no secret that we in the Baltics view our eastern neighbor with suspicion. For centuries, the Baltic region has been a battleground caught between empires, wars, shifting borders. From the Teutonic Knights to the Soviet Union, armies have marched across our lands, leaving behind history of fortifications, trenches, and crappy Soviet cars. The last Russian troops left Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania only 30 years ago. But with the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, tensions have reached Cold War levels. Russia has made its ambitions clear through words and actions. It wants to reclaim what it considers lost territory. Many in the Baltics now believe war is not a question of if, but when. To prepare for this threat, the Baltic states are taking action. On January 19, 2024, the Defense Minister of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania announced a bold plan, the Baltic Defense Line. This massive defense system will include anti-tank barriers, bunkers and other fortifications along the border with Russia and Belarus. Together with the border defenses in Finland, Norway and Poland, it will create a continuous line of protection for NATO's eastern flank. But will it work? History has shown that no defensive line is completely impenetrable. Yet, modern warfare has also proven that fortifications can slow down and even stop larger invading forces, but only if designed correctly. In this video, I will break down the Baltic defense line, how it could be built, what it would take to defend it, and whether it could truly stop an invasion. Let's go back to the 13th century when the Danes, the Danes, the friendly Danes who ruled northern Estonia, built Hermann Castle in Narva. Why? Because even then threats from the east were real. The castle wasn't just a stronghold. It was a border fortification against the powerful Novgorod and Pskov republics. But this wasn't an isolated effort. A belt of castles from Narva all the way down to Daugavpils in present-day Latvia formed the main defensive line of Livonia. For nearly 3 centuries it held, but history shows that even the strongest lines can be breached. And in the 1550s, Ivan the Terrible forces did just that, tearing through Livonia in the brutal Livonian War. The region changed hands, but the need for defense didn't. Fortifications were improved until 1710, when Peter the Great's armies took control of Estonia and Latvia. With the region now part of the Russian Empire, defensive priorities shifted. The threat from the east wasn't a threat anymore, it was the government. And so, major border fortifications faded from strategic importance. Fast forward to the Estonian and Latvian wars of independence of 1918 to 1920, this was a maneuver warfare, not trench warfare. But even then, defensive positions were crucial. In Estonia, places like Narva and Petseri saw defensive lines being built. Now, contrast that with Finland, which in the 1920s constructed the Mannerheim line to defend against the Soviet Union. During the Winter War, it wasn't only snow speaking Finnish, it was also the concrete. Estonia and Latvia, for various reasons, didn't do the same. But by the 1930s, when the security situation worsened, Estonia started planning the Laidoner line, which was meant to be a series of modern defensive positions. But before it could be completed, Soviet troops rolled in during 1940 and the plan was abandoned. Then came World War II. With the Eastern Front raging, the Germans took a page from history and built defensive positions along natural barriers, the Narva River, the Sinimäed Hills. And these weren't just some small fortifications, this was serious defensive warfare. The Battle of Narva in 1944 was a bloodbath, costing the Soviets around 500,000 casualties. But as history often shows, defensive lines only hold as long as the enemy doesn't find another way around. And in the end, the Soviets did. So why does all of this matter today? Because the lesson is clear. The Baltic states have always had to prepare for threats from the east. It's part of our history, a part of our strategic thinking. And while today's defenses don't look like medieval castles, the principle is the same. Baltic countries started to seriously prepare for war after the annexation of Crimea in 2014. In the same year, the Russian FSB kidnapped an Estonian Internal Security Service agent visiting an informant on the border. Since then, Estonia has been building a border fence and a drone network to prevent Russian agents and smugglers from crossing the border. Lithuania followed us in 2017 by building a new fence on the border with Kaliningrad. Of course, the start of the Ukrainian invasion in February 2022 changed everything. It's not talked about much, but since 2014, Ukraine had been building a proper European wall on its border with Russia. The project was supposed to be finished in 2025, so they were able to build hundreds of kilometers of border before the invasion. However, the Ukrainian-Russian border is over 2,000 kilometers long, so properly covering it with defensive structures is close to impossible. Russian forces struggled much more in the areas of Donbass, where front lines had been continuously fortified since 2014. As such, when Russians themselves started to pull back under Ukrainian counterattacks, they decided to build defensive positions. So, the Surovikin line was born. Those who have watched my channel for a long time remember that me and many other YouTubers, military bloggers, we were joking about that line when it was first created. It was falling apart as it was being built, and it was penetrated by Ukrainians during the counteroffensive. But after all, it was there. It slowed Ukrainians down enough to limit their advance in 2023. And that was what Russians wanted it to do. This is an important lesson that the Baltics took from the Russians. Any defense is better than no defense. We don't want Russians to take any territory, and so we need to defeat them on the border. As was said by the previous head of the defense forces, Martin Herem, quote, "The Russian army has no need to occupy Tallinn. It can run rampant in the town of Põlva for a month, turn it into another Bucha, and then withdraw, whereas we will be left quarreling with each other." End of quote. The Baltics have much to be concerned about. With a combined population of only 6 million people, their resources, both in terms and manpower and funds, are severely limited. Unlike most Western armies, the Baltic countries allow the concept of total defense, mobilizing their entire population for the war effort. While in NATO members, the fighting is left to the small professional armies, the total defense model establishes that during the war, every available resource must be part of the country's defense. While NATO provides a broader framework for regional security, the Baltic model emphasizes self-reliance and rapid mobilization as first line of defense. Despite this, their militaries, while exceeding expectations thanks to their reserve forces, lack significant monetary resources. This has forced them to focus on essentials, foregoing advanced military technology. Without a sizable navy, air force, or tank fleet, the Baltic countries have adopted a defensive strategy that has been christened as Hedgehog. This strategy relies primarily on light infantry forces that will dig in and hold their positions against an overwhelming odds until NATO allies, particularly the United States, are able to rally their troops and reinforce the region. Since 2014, the Baltic militaries have undergone significant changes, from revising the very core principle of total defense to upgrading the more minute details of the equipment. Lithuania and Latvia reintroduced national conscription in 2014 and 2022. Estonia has always had it. Previously, Baltic defense strategies emphasized maneuver warfare and guerrilla campaigns to weaken occupying forces until NATO allies gather enough strength to re-liberate the Baltics. This model has now been reworked. The Russo-Ukrainian war has shown that giving up territorial control would be too costly, both for the civilians and for the soldiers that need to re-liberate those areas. We all saw what happened in Bucha. Moreover, In the Baltics, there are many who doubt that Western politicians would even reach a decision to liberate us. It could only take one politician like Orban to stall NATO's actions. Increased military spending over the last decade has allowed the Baltics to greatly upgrade their equipment. Since 2022, the focus has increasingly shifted towards static warfare, including the use of long-range weapons. Estonia received our first batch of HIMARS only 2 weeks ago. That's very much wow. Lessons learned from the war in Ukraine have led all three countries to invest heavily in medium and long-range weapons capable of targeting supply bases and troop concentrations beyond the front line. By the way, did you know that Estonia has a coastline defensive missile systems that can reach St. Petersburg, the second largest city in Russia, home to the Russian Baltic fleet, and we have these missiles that are waiting coordinates. The Baltics suffer not only from a lack of resources, but also from limited strategic depth. For example, during the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces reached the Kyiv suburb of Oblivion, approximately 100 kilometers from the border, within 24 hours. In the Baltics, 100 kilometers is half the country and includes 5 of the region's 10 largest cities. Nowhere is this weakness more clear than in Lithuania. The Lithuanian capital Vilnius is less than 35 kilometers from the Russo-Belarusian border, far closer than the distance between any of the major Ukrainian cities and the Russian border. Even without crossing the border, Russian forces could target Vilnius, the biggest city of the Baltics, with artillery fire. Lithuania also shares nearly 1,000 kilometers of border with Belarus and Kaliningrad. While the Kaliningrad border largely follows rivers, offering some natural defenses, the rest of the Lithuanian's border is a patchwork of small forests and open fields. Most of Lithuania's population resides in a corridor between these states, which would likely bear the brunt of an invasion aimed at cutting the vital Suwalki Gap. Latvia faces similar challenges. Although parts of its eastern border are covered by forests and swamps, significant open areas in key towns like Rezekne and Daugavpils are also in close proximity. Historically, defenses in the direction of eastern Latvia were breached during the independence wars as well as World War II, leading to the division of Latvia and attacks on Estonia from the southeast. Since World War II, border areas in Latvia and across the Baltics have undergone significant reforestations due to economic changes and Soviet collectivization. That means we have now more forests on the borders than we did 100 years ago. Out of all 3 Baltic states, here in Estonia we have the most advantageous border. About half of the border with Russia is covered by Lake Peipsi, providing a natural defensive barrier. The northeastern border runs along the Narva River and is forested and swampy, very swampy, forcing any invading force into a narrow corridor between the forest and the Baltic Sea. However, the southwestern border, while hilly and forested, is less defensible. Since the accession of Baltic states into NATO in 2004, there has been one problem that has been kept logisticians and planners awake during nights: ammunition. Baltics have spent over a decade preparing for confrontation with Russia, and they have started to accumulate ammunition for prolonged conflict. The need for extra ammunition has been a behind-the-scenes hot topic in the Baltics since February of 2022. Even as these worries are being smoothed over by new money injections by the Baltic governments, the truth is that Baltics, due to their small size and proximity to Russia, just do not have the domestic military industry to supply its troops for a Ukraine war-scale conflict. The stockpiles of ammunition and weapons might alleviate the problem, but they will not be a long-term solution. We need to start producing. In this problem, the NATO capacity should prove to be more than enough to produce what is needed and send it to the Baltics together with the troops and the alliance. However, the most vital area in NATO's logistics is paradoxically also the soft spot of the Baltic defensive line. Long seen as the gap in the armor of NATO, the gap of Suwalki sits on the border of Lithuania and Poland. This 65-kilometer gap does not only represent the only land road to the Baltics, but also cuts the strategically important Kaliningrad Oblast from Belarus and Russia. The differences in defensiveness are seen in the implementation of the Baltic defensive line. Latvia and Lithuania plan to build bunkers primarily along the main roads and likely invasion routes, as the entire border is just too long to be covered with current budget allocations. Estonia, however, intends to construct 600 bunkers capable of housing 6,000 defenders. It helps us a lot that compared to Ukraine, the Baltics are much more forested and swampy. The unfortunate death of American soldiers in Lithuania shows that these swamps can be very dangerous weapon. All three countries have agreed to deploy a mix of anti-mobility installations such as Dragon's Teeth, anti-tank Hedgehogs and anti-tank mines that will be stored in support points and storage areas behind the defensive line. Not only that, but a wall of drones will also be created stretching from Norway to Poland. We're talking over 2,000 kilometers. In Estonia, the line's depth is expected to reach up to 40 kilometers, with bunkers acting as strong points that can be reinforced with minefields and trenches when necessary. This is a lesson I'm very happy that Estonia is taking. If the defense is long and hard, sooner or later it will be breached and not work anymore. Defensive lines need to be soft, so when push comes to shove, it will bend and not break. Construction has already begun in Latvia and Lithuania, with anti-tank installations like Dragon's Teeth and Hedgehogs stored near the border. Estonia plans to start bunker construction this year, having already completed tests for different bunker models. These modular bunkers, measuring 35 square meters and housing 10 soldiers, will be built 2 meters underground and designed to withstand direct hits from standard 155mm artillery shells. While these plans reflect the Baltic states' view of Russia as a long-term threat, they do not suggest an immediate danger from the Russian Federation. While Russia has shown willingness to reclaim territories of the USSR, the ongoing war has depleted its resources into a point where invasion of the Baltics is not viable immediately, unless they are planning to attack on horseback. I mean, that worked against the Great Wall of China, I guess. Mongols always have the best of tactics. Before the 2022 invasion, Russia's military took almost a year and a half to build up its forces on the Ukrainian border. If an invasion of the Baltics followed a similar model, most additional fortifications, including trenches and minefields, could be prepared by reserve units in a short time. As former Estonian Armed Forces head Martin Herem stated, and I quote, "I don't think we should build it like the Maginot Line or a similar structure. However, we must be able to create such a line of defense in an extremely short time, just a couple of days." End of quote. In conclusion, plans for a defensive line against Russia show the distrust that we in the Baltics have towards Russia. This stance is to all interests and purposes confirmed by the wars fought in Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova. Baltics, which cannot afford the luxury of defense in depth, have now decided that the threat of Russian aggression has reached the level of the 1930s. In the eyes of the Baltic states, the lack of manpower and resources in these small countries necessitated the construction of the defensive line as a force multiplier. Only time will tell if these fears are justified or if these fortifications mark the end of centuries of conflict over this small seaside region. My friends, that was my in-depth analysis of the Baltic defensive line. If you liked it, please subscribe to the channel, and if you want to get these videos 4 times a month, these are in addition to my Ukrainian updates. These are in-depth analysis of topics connected to the Baltics and Ukraine. These are for members only. So sign up to be a channel member. It's only 99 cents a month, so it's $1 per month. Link is in the description below, and then you will see 4 extra members only in-depth analysis videos per month. I'll see you in the memberships, my friends. Until my next video, Slava Ukraini, and bye-bye.